Welcome to Do Not Pass Go, your very own survival guide to our monopolized times. I'm your host, Peter Nowak. The fundamental thing that we talk about here on the podcast is the fact that we as Canadians have little choice when it comes to just about every product and service out there. As the old saying goes, whether it's banks, airlines, telecom, or you name it, Canada is three companies in a trench coat. But what if we're actually lucky to have those three companies? What if it was only two, or even worse, just one? That's the unfortunate reality that Canadians living in the North, in the territories, are forced to contend with every day on many fronts. It's particularly true in telecom, where Northwestel, a division of Bell Canada, holds a virtual monopoly over services. The company owns the majority of the fiber and wireless infrastructure, and as such holds sway over a large percentage of the population in the region. And it's a bit of an understatement to say that the people are not happy. In June, the Yukon government wrote a series of letters to Bell, the CRTC, and to Innovation, Science and Economic Development Minister Melanie Joly to express its exasperation and the public's exasperation with the quality of service available, or rather the lack of it. Among the main complaints in those letters are, quote, unreliable call completion and data performance within Whitehorse, significant coverage gaps along major highways and remote travel corridors, and network degradation during peak usage periods and emergency events, end quote. These issues, which have been going on for years, are a serious problem for both the territory's economy and the safety of the people, especially given the rising incidence of wildfires. Through the letters, the Yukon government is urging regulators and Ottawa to take action to force the monopoly to improve its services, at least to the level that Canadians in the South take for granted. Joining us now to discuss the situation and how it affects life in the North is Jennifer Gehmair, Minister of Economic Development, Tourism and Culture for the Yukon government. Okay, so back in June, your government sent letters complaining about Bell's service to the company and to the CRTC and to Innovation, Science and Economic Development Minister Melanie Joly. Those letters, they were slightly different from each other. So can you kind of briefly take us through what they said and kind of the differences between the three of them?
Yeah, so Yukon is as a northern region, but there's certainly some challenges when it comes to the infrastructure for things like cellular service. And we can get into that in a little bit. But essentially, what we're looking for and what we're asking for support is seeing some reliability, increased reliability on our network. Over the many years, the Yukon government has worked in partnership with the federal government, with Bell, to see that the service here is reliable and sustainable. But as we've seen, over the last little while, or over the last decade even, the reliability and the necessity of these services have grown exponentially. And looking at it from a business perspective, businesses rely on cellular service every day. It's not for transactions, it's for communications and marketing, and it's just become the backbone of our economy. So, what we're asking for now and what we're hearing from residents more and more is that the reliability of the cellular network here is degrading, and that, we're seeing many factors that lead to that. I'm sure we are growing. We're seeing a lot of interest in the north. There's more services that are using the cellular network, and we want to, see that there's the reliability and sustainability there. So we've asked Bell to look at and respond to us around the unreliable network services that we're getting right now. You don't have to go far to find someone who's had a challenging phone call or just doesn't have service at all, even in areas that did at one time have service. And we're asking for them to give some more information around these gaps and to offer us more clarity and plans on what that's going to look like. So, and then we reached out to the CRTC to just seek some support in, through their mandate on what the policy levers were that they could support us in, and then just to seek more opportunity to have conversations with them about it. And similarly with the federal government. Federal government has for a long time been a supporter of Yukon's infrastructure, network infrastructure. And again, we're just trying to maintain the open lines of communication with the federal government to say, hey, we're seeing this as a challenge. We know that the world is looking north right now, and we want to make sure that we are prepared to have that service reliability that, ultimately Yukoners have come to expect, and quite frankly, Canada as well.
Now, before we get to what sort of responses you've received or not received, you are asking for specific or for regulatory and policy levers to be pulled to force Bell into fixing those their services. Can you give us an idea of what specific levers we're talking about? Like, is there something specific that you're asking the CRTC and ISED to do?
There's nothing specific that we're asking for them to do. What we're asking for is for them to look at what they have as levers and have a conversation with us about that. Ultimately, we are outcome focused on this. It's how we get there is important, but the what we would like to see is a better service up here. So we're certainly not dictating or demanding that the CRTC or the federal government utilize levers in a punitive way. We would like this to be a mutual open dialogue on how the support can be utilized between all of us. We are coming here as a willing partner to see these improvements as well. And, we have the same expectation from Bell. So, I wouldn't say that we have anything specific. What we're asking for in the letters is, let us know what options are available to us, and we are willing to and stand by ready to engage. So, we know what we have for leverage, and we're looking to the federal government to support us in that, and ultimately Bell to come to the table and have that conversation as well.
Right now, this has been going on for quite some time. 2 years ago, I guess the premier there in the Yukon wrote a similar letter or expressed similar frustrations. And I actually remember writing about this, not in necessarily the Yukon. Years ago, I visited the Northwest Territories next door, and they had similar issues there. That was a long time ago. So, are these pleas just kind of falling on deaf ears, or what's the reaction, or what's happening?
I mean, if you look back 10, 15 years, there's been advancements and there's been investment in the infrastructure in the territory. I think that, but everyone knows those all require upkeep and ongoing investments. And I think, there's geography, there's population, there's increased use of these services in the territory. And I think it's somewhat fair to say that there has not been the same amount of improvements or investments or whatever you want to call it to maintain the level of service that Canadians have come to expect. So, while there have been investments, we're not saying we've been completely underserviced for the last decade. We're at a point now where the service is degrading, and Yukoners are noticing it, and we're all kind of feeling it and experiencing it, and we want to keep on top of it.
Yeah, that sounds a little bit incongruous. Like if there's been investment, if the companies, particularly Bell and Northwestel, have been investing, and the company that has said that they've invested, what is it? It's something like $20 million in the territory since 2019. Then what's causing the degradation? And further to that, Bell also says, I think the response basically to those letters is that they're open to partnerships with territorial and federal governments, and that it's a challenge for private investment alone to get things, to the level that they need to be, which sounds like they want subsidies. So what's your
Yeah.
response to that?
I mean, the questions you're asking are the questions we have too. We don't know, and we'd like to know what has caused the change in the last year or so. So that's part of the question we have out there. Certainly, it's no surprise that they're looking for partnerships and that they're looking for investments. And while we're not in a position to say, yeah, for sure, let's do that, we would like to have that conversation. And we know traditionally there has been federal investment, territorial investment in securing a network in the territory that is consistent with the rest of the country. And we're certainly not denying the fact that there are challenges in the north with respect to investing in this type of infrastructure. The least of which is the geography of the north as well as the market size. So those are all conversations we're willing to have, and this is the effort and levers that I have as a territorial minister and as an MLA to bring forward and have these conversations with Bob.
Is there an element of government procurement? I assume that the Yukon government does some level of procurement with Northwestel. Could you withhold that until they fix the problems, or is that on the table?
We're not at that point yet. But yes, of course, there's procurement, there's investments, there are levers there. I think though that we will utilize should we need to. Where we're at right now is understanding what the challenge is and seeing where we can find partnership. And at the end of the day, to be outcome based, to say, okay, are cell phones better? Can I use my phone at the top of the 2 Mile Hill now, which is kind of a point of frustration for a lot of folks in the territory, and many of whom will appreciate the fact that you get to stop 2 Mile Hill, your call is going to drop. And that is a very busy intersection in the territory. So if we can get to a point where we've got some consistency in our call in the network, then we will be in a better place.
Now, what about the response from the CRTC and ISED? Have you had a response from them in regards to those letters?
Yeah, we've had some dialogue, and the federal government does have some funding streams available and some programs. And recently, they were taking feedback of which we have participated in for mobile networks. So the dialogue there is ongoing, and the willingness to support it appears to be there, and acknowledgement of the challenge. What is faced in upkeeping the network infrastructure in the north. So that conversation is ongoing, and I anticipate we'll have more discussions down the line. But I'm hoping to kind of keep things moving quickly and swiftly so that we can see some tangible outcomes in the near future.
What about, so I know that in the past down here in the South, it's funny talking about Southern Canada that way. When I think of the South, I think of like Alabama or something like that. But we're here in the Canadian South.
Yeah.
We've had like towns and municipalities participate in CRTC proceedings on things like wholesale broadband disputes and that sort of thing. I don't think the Yukon government has really done much of that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but given what's happening, is that something that you would might want to change, or is that something that you might want to do in the future?
hmm Yeah, I don't think anything's off the table. I think that there's many ways to go around this, or sorry, not go around this, to go through this and to address some of these challenges. I know we've participated maybe as written or whatnot, but the depth of which those opportunities are available are certainly on the table. But we have not gotten to that point of making those decisions yet.
Okay, let's shift a little bit to Northwest Hell and 60 North Unity. So that was a deal
hmm
that was announced, or a transaction that was announced, something like 2 years ago. So 60 North Unity is an Indigenous consortium, and the agreement was that Bell was going to sell Northwest Hell, its division up there, for $1 billion to that
hmm
consortium. But the deal hasn't closed yet. So I don't know if there's much that's been reported on that. What can you tell us what's happening there with that deal kind of being in limbo, or not much being known about it? I think there's some would say that it's understandable that there's a sort of pause on investment. So what is going on, and is the Yukon government, your government, doing anything to speed that up, or what's happening?
Yeah, to be quite honest on this one, I don't have anything to share on this. I mean, this is not a Yukon government process. It is, between two commercial parties and a regulatory process. So, unfortunately, we did try to get some information on this, but I don't really have anything to share. I mean, we would certainly welcome any sort of announcement on, the ownership or whatever, wherever this process has landed, and to see some opportunity with Indigenous investment in major infrastructure like this is one that we would welcome. But unfortunately, I don't have any information that I even know or to share on this one.
Yeah,
So
well,
sorry
you
about that.
you mentioned earlier that there's more eyes on the North now for
hmm
various strategic reasons and so on. Is there some sort of federal you know interference, for lack of a better word, in this deal, or is there federal interest in this deal that you can talk about?
Not that I am aware of. Yeah, I don't have the details on this one at all that I can share, or that I even know of. Because as far as I know, this is between two commercial parties, two private entities. So we have not been shared any information that. So hopefully we hear more soon, but I just don't know.
All right, well, let's jump onto back onto the wireless situation. So the competitive situation in Yukon. So Bell largely has that monopoly, and when we talk about monopoly, it is a network monopoly. So Rogers is not up there. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Rogers is not here. Freedom does not have a network up there, and if I'm not mistaken, Telus and Bell share a network. So Telus is effectively piggybacking off of Bell. What about some smaller operators like Ice Wireless? I think is up there. What's the
hmm
competitive situation like for consumers?
Yeah, I mean, Ice Wireless is an entity. Telus is here. Telus is, like you say, it is on Bell's infrastructure. Bell's the big player, always has been. I think we definitely welcome, more opportunity for competition, more opportunity to create more consumer choice at the end of the day, and letting the markets in this space really, do what they do in the private market. So having TELUS come up here quite a few years ago now was, a good step to that. Ice Wireless, like you say, it is also present in the territory, but with Bell being the big guy, it's not a monopoly, but it is certainly, has the market share, and with its affiliation with Northwestel as well. So we would certainly welcome to more investment in the north as far as the competition goes. But like we say, we also acknowledge that that's hard. You're looking at a population of over 45,000 people, but from a consumer's perspective, that's not a high volume of folks. But we are seeing a growth in population, and like I say, people are using cellular services and rely on them more and more every day. That market has evolved over the last little while, but stayed pretty much the same over the last 5 to 10 years.
It's really interesting that Rogers is not really set down any footprints there. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that. Just to anecdotally, in my neck of the woods in Ontario, north of Toronto, we have cottage country, and I remember years ago, many people were complaining about connectivity in cottage country. And then, of course, Starlink, which I'll ask you a bit about as
Hmm.
well. Starlink
Hmm.
came in and started rolling out service there. And lo and behold, the big three carriers started really beefing up their service in cottage country. Now, Starlink is present in Yukon. Again, I'll ask you about them specifically, but
Hmm.
what's the deal with Rogers?
Honestly, I'm not sure. I mean, I can guess that it's, a size, the market size and the market opportunities. But, like I say, we are evolving, and, anecdotally, I haven't heard anything, but, we would certainly welcome a conversation if there was interest in seeing investment for infrastructure of cellular networks, satellite, like you say, all sorts of technologies in the north. I think the opportunity here for not just the consumer market, but also the business market, and looking at the northern context around infrastructure, and that conversation right now is quite live. And there's to see businesses look at that, we would welcome those conversations, and support the investment in the territory as much as we could.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. There's no place like home, the unmatched comfort of our own space. We choose who we invite into that home, and when it comes to internet providers, that choice is even more important. You want a home internet provider that you can trust, a provider like TechSavvy. TechSavvy has been providing home internet to Canadians for over 25 years. TechSavvy offers fast, unlimited internet with speeds up to 3 gigs, and they charge a fair price for service. They also sell phone and TV services, and bonus, their 24/7 customer support is Canada based. Now, here's the thing. TechSavvy isn't just a telecom service provider. They fight. They fight for Canadians. TechSavvy advocates for a fairer, more competitive marketplace. So if you're looking for an internet provider with great service, affordable prices, and one that steps up and speaks out when it counts, then welcome home TechSavvy. Okay, so now this connectivity problem has real social, economic, and safety effects. So now Canadians
Hmm.
in the South complain about competitive problems, but I think they might even take that for granted compared to what's happening in the territories. Can you paint us a picture on how this problem is affecting life there?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
I mean, you're seeing a new generation of workers come into the workforce. You're seeing a new way of working. You're seeing a new way of communicating, and like it or not, there are days where I wish it wasn't that, and I've got teenagers for sure. But like it or not, it is where we are as a society, and the reliance on it has grown. So I can think of examples of small ones where you not having the reliable service creates an irritant in your day. But there are definitely scenarios, and most recently we had an individual in the media talking about the 3 times that they had to call 911 just to get an ambulance to them, because they could not get a clear connection to 911 to explain what it was that they needed. I've been a first responder in my own community, and I know where all the dead spots are on the highway, and I know that if I'm at a certain house, I may not be able to have a cell phone. So you have your radio on you anyways, but the locals have kind of grown up with the kind of connectivity challenges But as we continue to grow, as we continue to advance, and as we see our networks being what I assume to be more saturated with traffic, the reliableness to this and the risk that it poses increases. And out where I live, there's always been what we call dead spots, but they're growing. They're getting bigger and becoming more common. So like I said, we're asking to understand what is causing those, but the day-to-day realities, are an irritant, but the risks to, life, safety, and access to services becomes more and more challenging as time goes on. So the White Horse, even, I talked about the 2 Mile Hill earlier, that's right in the center of town. Or, we're not talking about driving an hour and not having service. We're talking about challenges in town. The Copper Ridge neighborhood has a lot of challenges with their service, and that goes back as long as I can remember. The new neighborhoods that are popping up have, challenges with connectivity. So it's, people have kind of come to manage it and navigate it. But as we look to seeing more investments in the north and the Arctic sovereignty piece and the security piece, all that with that comes probably more people, more services, more activity, and we need to have more reliability.
Yeah, it's baffling, given what's happening with all of the growing wildfires and so on, that this isn't,
Mhm.
higher priority.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, just to get back to Starlink for a second. So, it was not that long ago, actually, just a few years ago, that Starlink came into Canada
Mhm.
and started offering service in a fixed internet market. Now, last year, the Yukon government said it was going to cancel its Starlink contracts, or review them anyways, in light of the fun trade war that we're in.
Mhm.
I don't think we've heard much about that. So, can you give me an update on what is the government's current thinking as it relates to Starlink? And also, I guess we can sort of piggyback a question in there on Telesat. What's happening with Telesat? Because I believe there was some motion happening with potentially replacing Starlink with Telesat or something to that effect.
Starlink has become a true reality in the north. If you look at the consumer market, we were with Northwest Tel for a long time, and there's consumers out there who've made their choice. We're certainly not advocating on one side or another for that. With respect to the government and government services, Starlink is a backup that we have utilized in areas where it's necessary. I know our hospital healthcare centers all have some access to Starlink. We've recently had a redundancy line put into the territory that goes up over into NWT and back around, which has created some certainty on our broadband accessibility and fiber. So that is a big game changer for us. I can remember 2 years ago being in Dawson and the network went out, and it was the Association of Yukon Communities. Many of the government leaders and First Nation leaders and all municipal leaders were in Dawson, and the cell phone network went out, and we couldn't get a hold of anyone. You could not talk to anyone. There was no phone. There was no cell service. There wasn't anything. You couldn't even get money out of the bank machine. So a lot of folks were going like, "How am I going to get home? How am I going to call my family?" And there was one Starlink that was in the parking lot of the one of the hotels that people were trying to utilize, and it was completely saturated. All that to say, it was a moment of like, man, like we're vulnerable up here. We know we're vulnerable, but you could feel it. You could feel kind of the stress and the anxiety around that. So that redundancy that's now in place, will prevent or at least dramatically reduce the risk of those types of scenarios. But we do remain very vulnerable on the cell phone network thing. We're seeing times where I call it robot voice, on the cell phone. You're not hearing people what they're saying. You're trying to have conversations. I was a little bit stressed about this interview because, I'm on Wi-Fi, I'm on network, it's pretty good, but there's a lot of, for lack of a better word, trauma. I don't know what's going to happen here. So far, it's been good.
Yeah. That would really illustrate the problems we're talking about if we had a crap out here of the internet.
It
But
really would. Yeah.
okay, so the Starlink contracts, they haven't been canceled, or what you said it's a
They're in
backup,
place. They're emergency backup, right? So
right?
Yukon government is fully networked in together with fiber and all that, but we do have backup where they're necessary. Yeah.
And Telesat, so as far as last thing I read was Telesat's, equivalent to Starlink service is not going to be happening for a little while yet, at least another year or two, I think. Is that something that's on the horizon for you? Are you hopeful to replace Starlink with Telesat?
I don't know much about that. It's not on my radar right now. But that doesn't mean it's not on anybody's radar. I don't think that we're financially we're in a situation where we're not going to be investing in big new technologies anytime this year. But I'll have to double check on that because I'm not exactly sure where we are at on that from a government perspective.
All right, well, let's journey out of telecom and into another big problem, which is grocery prices. Obviously, this is a big problem across Canada, but we've seen the social media posts about some of the astronomical food prices in the north. It's obviously been the case for quite some time. And, there's a reality at play here. Logistics and transportation obviously play a big role in those prices. But how much does competition between retailers or lack thereof play a role up in the territory? Another kind of big topic that we've had over the last little while is property controls, where some of the big chains have, restrictive real estate deals that prevent other grocery stores from happening. So, what can you tell us on that front? What's the competition level like with the grocery retailers there, and how does that contribute to the food prices?
Yeah, I mean, like with anything in the north, the realities of being northern exist, and food is no different. In that you've got additional transportation costs, you've got somewhat smaller markets, supply chain, fuel costs. All those impact food. There's no question there. I do think when you talk about food in the north, there are kind of two different conversations being had. One is the very remote food security piece, and that's where the federal government has programs like Nutrition North to support. And while the Whitehorse periphery Yukon communities aren't as impacted by those types of food costs, Old Crow, for example, is a community that is a flying community only, consistent with other areas that are supported by the federal program, see extremely high food costs. So, when we're talking about food in the north, there's kind of two different conversations there. In the territory, all other communities that are accessible by road have, factors that for increased food prices that are consistent across fuel, transportation, all those types of things. So we're seeing that play out similar to and somewhat consistent with the rest of the country as costs rise, fuel prices rise, all of that, the cost of food goes up. So I think that separation is important. As far as competition goes, I mean, I would say our grocery market here is fairly healthy. We've got quite a few competitors in the north, and conversation around real estate and that has not been a big discussion that I'm aware of at this point right now. But certainly having a stronger, more competitive market is always healthy, and having that consumer choice is always beneficial to Yukoners. So we've got at least five big grocery stores here that serve Whitehorse, and most communities have access to groceries. But when you start to go outside of the Whitehorse core in the communities, that's where you see very little competition for groceries. And it's part of what has created Whitehorse to be this hub type of thing, which is, we would love to be able to create more market opportunities in the communities, and quite frankly are looking at how we can do that through all of the government levers. But there's groceries in the community, but the competition just doesn't exist in most places.
Yeah, no, I don't know if this addresses any of it, but the federal government recently announced, I think it was about 1.2 billion million in funding for improving the food system. They did that this past spring. What is that covering? And that seems like a relatively small amount? Is that enough to do what it's supposed to do?
I'm not sure exactly which funding that's for, but I do know that there's been investments recently in agriculture. Food security with respect to local production has certainly been a priority for us. There's lots of the agricultural market here is surprisingly, I won't say robust, but our grocery stores do carry local eggs, local, I'm going to forget someone, I'm sure, but vegetables and popcorn, and we've got a very active local food production industry here in the north as well as in agriculture. So I know that there's been investments in that, and there will continue to be. I think, looking back at the last 6 years and some of the challenges that we've all kind of our generation has become more live to, that sometimes there are supply chains. Toilet paper is a great example. But what can we do here to create our own resiliency in the north and have more food production, which you want to say, and it will help bring the cost of food down. But, with that also comes raising chickens in the north is a little bit more expensive. And so but creating some resiliency and some redundancy and some own locally run businesses that are supporting the north is, best case scenario for us. And we will continue to invest in those and support those operations with however we can. You look at the national picture of, how Yukon is contributing to this, and we are doing everything we can to support our local farmers, our local producers, our local manufacturers. So all at the same time, Canada's doing the same thing on a larger scale. And when you look at the national environment right now on trade and all that type of thing. So we're active players at that table. We're small. I'd like to say we're quite mighty and doing everything we can to create that opportunity here in the north and to encourage that type of investment.
The 1.2 million that I was referring to, that was for the Canadian Northern Economic Development Agency, CanNor, and it's apparently,
Canada. Okay.
yeah, it's for community-driven food and agriculture projects in the
Okay.
north. All right, well, let's close out then with, I'll just ask you about competition in general. Canadians in the south complain about a lack of competition across a variety of markets, from telecom and groceries to banks, airlines, you name it. Do Northerners look at that and think, oh, isn't that quaint? Like, do we have it comparatively good in the South? Is that kind of the prevailing attitude?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that to say the least, that is the case. I think, we have been blessed by, some investments in the territory. And we are quite a robust economy when it comes to consumer choice and consumer options comparative to our population. You look at our food and beverage markets, and they're right now is a tough time, but overall there's a lot of those investments, there's a lot of those small businesses. I would say in comparison to the north, it's a significantly smaller scale, and I think there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit up here. There's a lot of government investment in that entrepreneurial spirit, which isn't going to go anywhere. What we're trying to do, we're a relatively new government, is look at how we can help make those opportunities for these small businesses a little bit easier, especially in kind of the realities of today's world, today's markets, and also, support these companies or businesses and to expand, to support the north, to expand outside of the north. We're looking at all sorts of different mechanisms to do that, but I think there's a really lively and active market of investors here, and a government that has traditionally been an active participant in the success of those businesses. That does create competitiveness that we're talking about here. You've been to the north, most people know other people, they know their businesses, and Yukoners are keen to support Yukon businesses as much as we can. The cost is usually comparative. You can also look at markets such as our arts market. I don't know what the numbers are, but the artist market has exploded in the last several years, and the competition that now exists in access to earrings, to jewelry, to art is enormous, and we're seeing those move out of the territory and take place on national stages, which is incredible. So I anticipate that we will continue to see that growth. I would say it's fair that Yukoners don't often compare themselves to the north. I think that, or sorry, to the south. I think there is kind of this working, we're just not used to it, to be honest. So while we support southern investment and cooperation and collaboration, the markets are very different, and I think the way that the government participates in these markets has been quite active for many years, for good reason. I'd love to see more competition in the north to move government investments into the growth space, but we will continue to support the markets and when I talk about markets, like, there's so many different types that are going through my mind right now, because we do have a lot of activity here in the north. But I think we are keen to support the locals and see how we can grow and continue to see the opportunity here in the north for Yukoners as well as those interested in coming to the north.
Just a quick pick up on what you just said there. Why is the art market exploding?
It's a great question. I mean, I think that, you've seen this, I think COVID probably had something to do with it. People picking up art, government investment, no question, had something to do with it. There used to be, maybe 2 or 3 art markets. You had your spruce bog that's been around for a long time where people would make all of their crafts and sell them. Now we've got a fireweed market that is extremely popular every Thursday in Whitehorse. Every community has their own type of market. We've got artists living in communities that are creating, their own product, homemade product that they're selling within the country, and they're also selling outside of the jurisdiction. So you don't have to look far to find an art market. I'm a big supporter of the market myself. I think that it has seen a huge increase, and it's fantastic to see.
A big thanks to Jennifer Gehmair for joining us this week to talk about the limited choices available to Canadians in the North. Not that it should make anyone living in the South feel better about their own situation, but it's definitely a worthwhile perspective to keep in mind. Just a reminder that if you'd like the work we do here, you can help support it by becoming a paid subscriber. It's only $8 a month or $80 a year. Head to donotpassgo.ca to sign up. And with that, we'll see you next time.